The Unitarian Church in Quincy, Illinois is proud to present a sermon from our minister, the Reverend Dr. Rob Manning, titled The View from Afar, How the U.S. is Perceived from Abroad. Originally presented on Sunday morning, March the 25th, 2007, and recorded live. This sermon is number 4 in our continuing series of sermons, Podcast Beyond the Walls of Our Church, to all the world.
The opening words come from Annie Dillard, a poet and a writer from Pittsburgh. We are here to abet creation and to witness to it, to notice each other's beautiful face and complex nature, so that creation need not play to an empty house. In these recent talks, I'm trying to work out some things that I was thinking about while I was living away for a year, most of a year. And one of the things I was thinking about the whole time and absorbing was how the United States is perceived abroad in the various countries where I was, and of course most of my time was spent in Romania. So this is what this talk is about, and here's a reading. This comes from a book on anti-Americanism, understanding anti-Americanism around the planet, and it quotes the Pew Research Center's survey of global opinions. And it says that since 2000, favorability ratings for the United States have fallen in 19 of the 27 countries where benchmarks are available. While criticism of America is on the rise, a reserve of goodwill still remains. The U.S. and its citizens continue to be rated positively by majorities in 35 of the 42 countries. True dislike, if not hatred, is concentrated in Muslim nations of the Middle East and in Central Asia. Opinions about the U.S., however, are complicated and contradictory. People around the world embrace things American, and at the same time they decry U.S. influence on their societies. U.S. global influence is simultaneously embraced and rejected by the world. America is nearly universally admired for its technological achievements, and people in most countries say they enjoy U.S. movies and television programs. Yet the spread of U.S. ideas and customs is disliked by majorities in almost every country included in the survey. I want to begin this by quoting an interview last Sunday that I saw on CNN with Donald Trump. Now, I don't know anything about Donald Trump. I mean, I know he's a wealthy person and he has some television show. And you might think that Donald Trump is the biggest idiot in the world, and perhaps he is. But I was listening to an interview with him, and he just happened to say this. He was saying that the Iraq War is a total catastrophe. And you can see this interview on YouTube. And then he said, but what might be even worse is the rest of the world hates us. He said, I travel to Europe, I do business dealings around the world. The world hates us, Europeans hate us. You go to Germany, England, places where we never had problems before, and they hate Americans because of what has happened, meaning mostly the Iraq War. And then he said, we had the chance after September 11th to be the most popular country on the earth with everyone's sympathy, and we blew it. Now, I've read a couple books on anti-Americanism, the history of anti-Americanism, and I've done a bit of traveling. But it certainly doesn't qualify me as an expert on world opinions or even Europeans' opinions on how they think of the United States. However, in the last year, I have done a bit of traveling. And thinking of it, I have been to, in the last year, I have been to Romania, Hungary, Bulgaria, Turkey, Serbia, Croatia, Italy, Germany, Spain, and Egypt. So I guess I have a little bit of qualifications to say something about how the United States is perceived. And I have to admit, because I'm no fan of the Bush administration and certainly no fan of the Iraq War, I went expecting to run in, when I was in Europe, I went expecting to run into anti-American sentiment. And I remember one of my first days in Bucharest, I went into churches to explore churches, and on the door it said, Ankrit, USA. Wow. Am I encountering anti-Americanism in such a bold form already? Am I not allowed to come into these churches? And people did look suspiciously at me sometimes when I came in. Well, I embarrassedly found out that USA is the Romanian word for door. And all that sign was shut the door. And I have to say that I ran into a lot more positive, pro-American, welcoming American sentiment than I ran into anti-American sentiment. Time and time again, wherever I traveled, people would talk to me with envy about the fact that I was an American. And so many times, people would say, that's where I want to live, or that's where I want to visit. Once when Michelle and I were in Croatia, we were on the beach, and I went to the bar on the beach, and the bartender He knew I was an American. I guess I looked like an American. And he said, "Oh, I want to live in America." And I said, "You live in paradise. I mean, this is your job, serving drinks on the beach in Croatia. It's one of the most beautiful places on the earth." But the most striking pro-American experience I had is when I was walking down the street in Cairo. I walked by a grammar school, and I just happened to be walking by when the grammar school was getting out. And literally, all of the children saw me, ran out of the building, probably 100 kids, and ran up to me and hugged me and asked me how I was and where in the United States I was from. They were practicing their English, and they loved encountering an American. It was a wonderful, welcoming experience, and definitely one of the best experiences I had when I was traveling. And I felt like an American movie star. And I was greeted by those Egyptian kids as if I was an American movie star. And they didn't think I was an American movie star. They just thought I was an American. And they wanted to talk to one. Despite that fact, despite still a lot of positive experiences and a lot of people that I encountered liked America, admired America, and wanted to live in America, wanted to visit America, and definitely wanted to talk to Americans, still, there is a growing resentment of Americans in the world, and especially in Europe. And I know what you're going to say. You're going to say to me, "Oh, Rob, you're so predictable. You're going to say that growing resentment is all George Bush's fault." And I'll say, well, it does have something to do with George Bush. But let's hold off on George Bush for a while, and let's talk about other things. Other sources of resentment, and reason why Europeans especially resent America. Now, the first thing that I would talk about in explaining why Europeans resent Americans, at least the ones that I encountered, might surprise you. The first reason is religion. Romania is an Orthodox country, 85%. Always has been, hopefully always will be. That's the way Romanians tend to look at it. The Habsburgs wanted the Romanians to convert to Catholicism. The Soviets, of course, wanted the Romanians to give up their orthodoxy and become atheists. But they stubbornly held on to their Orthodox tradition. But in Timișoara, where I lived, and in Arad, which is the next biggest city about 50 miles away, the largest churches in Arad and Timișoara are Baptist and Pentecostal. And those are really growing denominations. And they are converting Eastern Orthodox people to a more personal, passionate, devout form of Christianity. And as American Unitarians, you might be disappointed to learn that at least where I lived in Timișoara, I did not encounter any Romanians who ever heard of Unitarianism. Even though Unitarianism began in Transylvania, which is now part of Romania, and 0.5% of the people of Romania are Unitarians. Now, 0.5% is not very much, but that 0.5% tends to be in Transylvania, in the Hungarian part of Romania. So they didn't hear of, Romanians did not know about Unitarianism, but they had personal experiences with those two quintessential American denominations, Jehovah's Witnesses and the Mormons. Now, you might think it's strange to see Mormons dressed up in the suits and working the streets of Timișoara or Arad or Cluj or other Romanian cities, just the way they do here in the United States. But Mormonism is a very missionary religion. And when I taught religion courses in Romania, every Romanian was familiar with the Mormons. And you have to remember that other post-Civil War religious movement, Jehovah's Witnesses, an American religious movement, it believes that all other Christian denominations are doomed to hell, and there are only 144,000 people to be saved, and you have to be, have to be a Jehovah's Witness. So that religious denomination, American religious denomination, is very missionary as well. And they are doing their work of converting in Eastern Europe and certainly in Romania. Now, there was another American professor who was teaching in the Romanian education system when I was. But she was not sent there by our government, by the Fulbright Foundation. She was sent there by her church. She did have a PhD in literature, and this is the way it worked. She called up the university in Romania, and she said, I will come and teach literature there, and you don't have to pay me. Now, what university in the world is going to turn down a deal like that? Because she doesn't need the Romanian education system to pay her, because her Protestant evangelical denomination is sending her and funding her in Romania to evangelize the Romanians. Now, she's not teaching religion, she's teaching literature. But she could teach religious themes in literature, she can teach some C.S. Lewis, and she sneaks in to the curriculum conversations about, oh, you mean your denomination doesn't ordain women? Now, where's the biblical basis for that? And I had a fascinating several conversations with her, and she had no problem whatsoever with what she was doing, because she was introducing into this Orthodox country a deeper, more true form of Christianity. Well, the fact of the matter is, the fall of the Iron Curtain has provided a great opportunity for American religious groups to evangelize. And in the minds of lots of Romanians and other Europeans, this evangelization is also seen as a form of Americanization. And there is some resentment to Americans because of that. Of course, the fall of the Iron Curtain was a great opportunity for American businesses as well. And wherever I went, you will always encounter Coke and Pepsi. Even in the tiniest village that has barely electricity, and most people still have horse and buggy, there will be a refrigerated case of Coca-Cola with the Coke sign, and next to it there'll be a refrigerated case of Pepsi. Certainly, the power of American corporations is everywhere. But I think what Romanians, at least, and a lot of Europeans resent, is the way that American corporations insinuate themselves and have a way of changing the society. McDonald's, all of the American fast food companies, not only are in these societies, but they always put themselves at the center of places where they have extremely high visibility. I mean, I'm sure when you've traveled landmarks in European countries, and then there's a McDonald's right next to it. Where I lived in Romania, in the very center of the historic district, right across from the Opera House, and right where the Romanian Revolution happened, in the central square, is the McDonald's. And I'm sure, as I've said, you'll all be happy to know that if you go to Cairo and you look from the Sphinx from the behind, the Sphinx looks straight out at the Pizza Hut and Burger King combo. It's really rather sad. The centrality of these places, American industries and businesses, also changed the way the societies live. McDonald's bombards kids all over the world with commercials, and so Romanian parents are pressured by their kids to go to McDonald's. And in Timișoara, a few years ago, there was for the first time a mall. A huge contemporary mall, which had never been in Timișoara. It was the talk of Romania. It was a fantastic mall. But you could see the change happen, the transformation of this society happen right in front of you. The mall sometimes had Fridays and Saturday nights where they were open all night, because the mall wanted to work this transformation. The businesses of the mall wanted to work the transformation so that people, instead of going to the bars and the pubs and hanging out with their friends or going to the theater, they went to the mall to shop. On a Sunday afternoon, a family, instead of going to the park, would go to the mall. The increasing consumerization of society was happening right there in front of you because of the marketing techniques of the mall. And that change, the growing consumerization of society, that increase where people are less civilians and more consumers in a society, that transformation gets pinpointed as Americanization and America's fault. Well, I do have to talk a little bit about the current administration and how it's perceived and what that has to do with a growing animosity and resentment to the United States. I have to say that one of the things that really struck me in my time in Europe is that Europeans, through their news media, they were much more familiar with the malapropisms and the mistakes that George Bush makes than Americans. I had a conversation at a conference with some people who were from Greece, and they were well familiar with the fact that George Bush thought Greeks were called Grecians. And they laughed. You always encountered people who, as soon as they found out you were American, they would talk about these mistakes. They were well familiar with the fact that George Bush referred to Africa as a country. And when he uttered the famous, and they were familiar before the war, when he uttered that famous challenge to Saddam Hussein, when he said, "You disarm or we will." Oh. The Europeans love that. Often they would talk to me about Bush's inability to pronounce the word nuclear, which Europeans didn't seem to understand since they had no trouble pronouncing it in a language which was not their native language. And while I was there, George Bush went to Vietnam, and my students, they followed this trip and they loved his version of what the United States learned through the Vietnam terrible experience. George Bush was asked that question while he was in Vietnam, and he said, quote, "The lesson of Vietnam is, we'll win unless we quit." My students loved it. They love to mock me. But, in my experience, Europeans that I encountered are more familiar with these types of things. It gets more press coverage than it does perhaps in the United States. And, I will say that I ran into this view that Europeans have, that they think that George Bush is stupid. And I was asked many times how America could elect a person whom they consider stupid. And several times people would say to me that they think Americans are stupid. And that was kind of unsettling. And I found myself trying to explain the 2000 election and explain some of the dynamics of the 2004 election. The image of the ugly American goes back all the way to the 19th century. The ugly American is someone who is, in the eyes of Europeans anyways, someone who is ignorant, uncultured, unsophisticated, but also wealthy. Wealthy and powerful, and the wealth makes the ugly American think that he's better than other people, and that he's able to boss them around and tell them what to do. You know, in the eyes of a lot of Europeans, George Bush is the embodiment of the ugly American. And they resent the fact that America has elected him and re-elected him and thereby imposed him on the world. And some of the world, I think, resents us for that. So, is Donald Trump right? Do Europeans everywhere really hate us? Well, judging by my experience, that's really too much to say. I mean, Ankrit USA did not mean Americans stay out, after all. But I will say that there is something troubling about the events of the last few years, and I do believe that Americans do not fully understand how we have slipped in the eyes of other people around the world, and especially in the eyes of Europeans. And I don't think Americans understand how they are resented by other people. And I will say something that's even more than that. I think that many Europeans think that this American cowboy president and his wars in Muslim countries, that they've had the effect of fueling Muslim hatred, not just for the United States and not just for Americans, but for all Westerners. And that they've made the world more dangerous for all Westerners. And I have the terrible feeling that when the terrorists attack the United States again, many Europeans inside themselves will think that unlike the attacks in Madrid and in London, at least if the terrorists attack in the United States, they will have attacked the country that brought it on themselves. The European reaction to the next terrorist attack in the United States will be much different than that expression of solidarity and support that came from all European countries after September 11. And was so well summed up by that headline, that famous headline in Le Monde, in the French newspaper, "We are all Americans now." Now, with the next terrorist attack on the United States, I think there are a lot of Europeans who will think, at least this time, the terrorists attacked them and not us. Let's give John Brigham the last words. Go your ways, knowing not the answers to all things, yet seeking always the answer to one more thing than you know.
We hope you've enjoyed this presentation of The View from Afar, How the U.S. is Perceived Abroad, by our minister, the Reverend Dr. Rob Manning. It was originally recorded live on March the 25th, 2007, at the Unitarian Church in Quincy, Illinois. We invite you to be with us this coming Sunday morning. The Unitarian Church is at the intersection of 16th and Hampshire Streets in Quincy. During winter months, our regular church services begin at 10:45. In the summer, we have a less formal service, a round-table style of discussion, and we begin at 9:30. On the World Wide Web, we can be found at uuquincy.org. Imagine a church where people with different beliefs worship as one faith.